The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Frogmore Cottage as Harry sat in his favorite armchair, cradling a cup of tea. The house felt different now, quieter in some ways, louder in others. Baby Archie's soft breathing came from the nursery upstairs, and Megan was still sleeping after another restless night with their newborn son. Harry's mind wandered to his grandmother, the Queen. Just 2 days ago, he had sat across from her in the drawing room at Windsor Castle, sharing news that would change everything. The conversation had been unlike any they'd ever had before. Gone were the formal protocols and careful words. Instead, there was something raw and honest between them. "Granny," he had said, using the name he'd called her since childhood, "I need to talk to you about the future." The Queen had set down her teacup with the same precise movement she'd made thousands of times before, but Harry noticed something different in her eyes. Perhaps it was understanding, or maybe just the weight of all the years between them. The Queen had listened without interruption as Harry explained his struggles. He talked about the constant media attention that felt like drowning. He described how every moment of his life was scrutinized, analyzed, and judged by people who didn't know him at all. Most importantly, he spoke about Archie and the kind of life he wanted for his son. "I remember when you were born," the Queen had said quietly. "Your father was so nervous he dropped his cigarette case twice in the waiting room. Diana was exhausted, but radiant. She looked at you like you were the most precious thing in the world." Harry's throat had tightened at the mention of his mother. Even after all these years, hearing her name still affected him deeply. The Queen continued, "Being a parent changes everything, Harry. It makes you see the world differently. Suddenly, nothing matters more than protecting that little life you've brought into the world." She paused, looking out the window toward the gardens where Harry had played as a child. "I understand your concerns, truly I do." Harry had expected anger or disappointment. Instead, he found compassion from a woman who had spent her entire life balancing duty with personal desires. The Queen shared stories he'd never heard before about her own children's early years, about the difficult decisions she'd had to make between being a mother and being a monarch. "When Charles was young," she said, "I sometimes felt torn between what was expected of me and what I wanted to give him as his mother. The same with Anne, Andrew, and Edward. There were moments when I wondered if I was doing right by them or by the crown." This admission surprised Harry. His grandmother had always seemed so certain, so unwavering in her decisions. They talked for hours about responsibility, about legacy, and about what it truly meant to serve. The Queen spoke about her own father, King George VI, and how unprepared he had felt when duty called. She described the loneliness that sometimes came with the role, but also the deep satisfaction of serving something greater than oneself. "But, Harry," she had said, reaching across to touch his hand, "times change. What worked for my generation might not work for yours. The world Archie will grow up in is different from the one you knew, just as yours was different from your father's." As Harry sat now in his cottage, he replayed every word of that conversation. His grandmother had given him something he hadn't expected, permission to find his own path. She hadn't agreed with all his choices, but she had listened with the kind of love that transcended titles and traditions. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted his thoughts. Megan appeared, still in her pajamas, with Archie in her arms. "Good morning," she whispered, settling beside Harry on the sofa. "You're up early again." "Couldn't sleep," Harry admitted. "Too much thinking." He reached for his son, marveling again at how small and perfect Archie was. Being a father had awakened something in him he didn't know existed. Every protective instinct had intensified. Every worry about the future had multiplied. "Have you decided what you're going to tell the family?" Megan asked softly. They both knew that bigger conversations were coming, decisions that would affect not just them, but the entire royal family. Harry looked down at Archie, who had grabbed his finger with a surprisingly strong grip. "I'm going to tell them the truth," he said finally. "That being an uncle, a father, a son, and a husband matters more to me than being a prince. That I want Archie to grow up knowing love before duty, happiness before obligation." The morning stretched before them, full of possibilities and uncertainties. Harry knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult conversations, public scrutiny, and family tensions. But holding his son and sitting beside his wife, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace with his choices. Outside, the grounds of Frogmore Cottage were coming alive with the sounds of a new day. Harry thought about his brother William and sister-in-law Catherine, probably getting their own children ready for the day at Kensington Palace. He thought about his father, likely already immersed in his morning correspondence and official papers. And he thought about his grandmother, perhaps taking her morning walk with her corgis, carrying the weight of a nation as she had for over 6 decades. Soon, he would need to have conversations that would change everything. But for now, in the quiet of the morning, Harry simply held his family close and allowed himself to imagine a future where being Archie's father was the most important role he would ever play. 3 weeks later, Harry found himself walking through Kensington Palace Gardens with his brother William. The autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet as they made their way toward the pond where they had sailed toy boats as children. This was their first real conversation since Harry's meeting with the Queen, and both brothers carried the weight of unspoken words. George asked about Uncle Harry yesterday, William said, breaking the comfortable silence. He wanted to know when you were coming to play football again. Harry smiled at the mention of his nephew. Prince George had inherited his father's love of sports and his mother's determination. At 6 years old, he was already showing signs of a strong personality that would serve him well in his future role. I miss him, Harry admitted. All of them. Charlotte's probably grown another inch since I saw her last week. And Louis is changing every day. The thought of his niece and nephews made his chest tight with emotion. Princess Charlotte, now 4, had her great-grandmother's sharp wit and her mother's grace. Prince Louis, still a toddler, brought chaos and joy wherever he went. William stopped walking and turned to face his brother. They miss you too. Catherine asks about you and Megan constantly. She wants to help, you know. She understands what it's like to marry into this family, to have everything you do examined under a microscope. The mention of Catherine brought back memories of easier times. Harry remembered when William had first brought her around the family. She had been nervous but determined, asking thoughtful questions and genuinely trying to understand their world. Over the years, she had become not just a sister-in-law, but a true friend, someone who understood the unique pressures they all faced. How was she handling everything? Harry asked. The children, the increased responsibilities, the constant attention. He knew that Catherine's role had expanded significantly in recent years, taking on more royal duties while maintaining her focus on early childhood development and mental health initiatives. She's stronger than she looks, William said with obvious pride. But it's not easy. Some days she comes home exhausted from events, and I find her reading bedtime stories to the children with her voice barely above a whisper. She never complains, but I see the toll it takes. He paused, picking up a fallen leaf and twirling it between his fingers. She worries about George especially, about the pressure he'll face when he's older. Harry understood that worry intimately. Being the heir brought responsibilities and expectations that were different from his own experience as the spare. At least George has you and Catherine to guide him. You both understand what it's really like now, not just the theory of it. They resumed walking, passing the memorial garden dedicated to their mother. Neither brother mentioned it, but both felt Diana's presence strongly in these moments. She had always encouraged them to support each other, to remember that their bond as brothers was more important than their roles as princes. Harry, William said carefully, I need you to know that whatever you decide, whatever path you choose, you'll always be my brother. Nothing changes that. The words carried years of shared experiences. Losing their mother, supporting each other through military service, celebrating each other's weddings, and now navigating fatherhood together. Harry stopped walking and looked at his brother, seeing not the future king, but the boy who had comforted him after nightmares, who had taught him to tie his shoelaces, who had stood beside him at their mother's funeral. I know that, he said quietly, but I also know that my choices affect you, affect the family, affect the monarchy. I don't take that lightly. Tell me about Archie, William said, changing the subject to safer ground. Really tell me. What's he like when it's just you three? Harry's face lit up immediately. He's incredible, Will. Yesterday, he grabbed Megan's hair and wouldn't let go. She was laughing and trying to untangle herself, and he just looked at us like we were the most entertaining thing he'd ever seen. And when he sleeps, he makes these little sounds like he's having conversations with himself. William laughed, recognizing the universal experience of new parenthood. George did that too. Catherine used to say he was practicing his future speeches. Lewis still talks in his sleep sometimes, usually about biscuits or toy cars. How do you do it? Harry asked seriously. Balance being their father with everything else? Some days I look at Archie and think about all the things I want to show him, all the places I want to take him, all the ways I want to protect him from the parts of this life that are hard. William was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. You remember when Dad used to take us on those walks at Balmoral? Just the three of us, no security in sight, talking about everything and nothing? Harry nodded. Those have been some of his favorite childhood memories. He told me once that being a father was the most important job he'd ever have, more important than being king someday. Did you believe him? Harry asked. Not then, William admitted. I was young and thought duty came first always. But now, when George looks at me with complete trust, when Charlotte asks me to fix her broken toy because she believes I can fix anything, when Lewis falls asleep on my chest after a long day, yes, I believe him now. They walked in companionable silence for a while, both lost in thoughts about their children and the futures they were trying to build for them. The palace grounds were quiet except for the distant sounds of traffic and the occasional call of a bird. Catherine has an idea, William said eventually. She thinks we should plan a proper family gathering. All the cousins together, no formal agenda, just time for them to be children together. George keeps asking when he can teach Archie to play cricket, even though Archie can barely hold his head up on his own. Harry smiled at the image. Megan would love that. She talks about wanting Archie to know his cousins, to have those relationships that go beyond royal protocol. He paused, thinking about his own relationship with his cousins and how those bonds had sustained him through difficult times. It doesn't have to change, you know, William said softly. Whatever decisions you make about your official role, the family part doesn't have to change. The children need each other. We needed each other. As they made their way back toward the palace, Harry felt a sense of hope he hadn't experienced in weeks. The path forward was still unclear, but knowing that his brother understood, that his niece and nephews would always be part of his life, made the uncertainty feel more manageable. Will, Harry said as they reached the palace steps, thank you. For understanding, for listening, for being my brother, even when I'm making everything complicated. William clasped him on the shoulder. That's what brothers do. Besides, someone has to keep an eye on you and make sure you don't get into too much trouble. The joke carried echoes of their childhood, when William had often been the more cautious older brother, while Harry had been the one pushing boundaries and testing limits. The following Saturday afternoon brought the family gathering that Catherine had suggested. Anmer Hall, the Cambridge family's Norfolk residence, buzzed with activity as 3 generations of royals descended upon the country estate. Harry arrived with Meghan and baby Archie, feeling both nervous and excited about this informal family time. Prince George ran to greet them at the front door, his energy infectious as always. Uncle Harry, did you bring the baby? Can I hold him? Mama said I have to be very careful because babies are fragile like butterfly wings. His enthusiasm made Harry laugh, remembering his own eagerness as a child when meeting new family members. He's right here, Harry said, adjusting Archie in his carrier. But first, let me see how much you've grown. Are you taller than me yet? George giggled and stood on his tiptoes, stretching as high as he could reach. Almost, Harry declared seriously. Maybe by Christmas. Princess Charlotte appeared next, carrying one of her dolls and wearing a dress that somehow remained pristine despite obvious outdoor play. She was more reserved than her brother, but equally curious about baby Archie. He's very small, she observed with the matter-of-fact tone she'd inherited from her great-grandmother. Mama says all babies are small at first, and then they grow up to be big like Papa. Prince Louis toddled toward them with the unsteady but determined gait of a 2-year-old, his face lighting up when he saw Harry. "Harry! Harry!" he called, raising his arms to be picked up. Harry scooped him up with his free arm, marveling at how much his youngest nephew had grown since their last meeting. Catherine emerged from the house looking relaxed in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. This was the Catherine that Harry knew best, not the polished duchess at public events, but the hands-on mother who wasn't afraid to get grass stains on her knees while playing with her children. "Thank you for coming," she said, embracing Meghan warmly. "The children have been talking about this all week. George has been practicing his gentle hands for when he meets Archie properly." She gestured toward the garden where a blanket had been spread under a large oak tree, toys scattered around invitingly. William appeared carrying a wooden tray loaded with sandwiches and juice boxes. "Thought we'd eat outside while the weather holds," he said. The children have been very specific about their picnic requirements. Apparently, cucumber sandwiches are essential, but the crust must be removed or it doesn't count as a proper picnic. As they settled on the blanket, Harry watched his family interact with his son. George was incredibly gentle, offering his finger for Archie to grip while asking a constant stream of questions. Why doesn't he talk yet? When will he be big enough to play football? Does he like dogs? We have a dog named Lupo, but he lives with Grandpa and Grandmama now. Charlotte was more observational, studying Archie with the intensity of a scientist. "His hands are like starfish," she announced, "and his hair is the same color as Papa's was when he was little. Mama showed me pictures." She looked up at Harry seriously. "Will you bring him to visit often? I think he needs to learn about being royal from his cousins." The afternoon unfolded with the easy rhythm of family time. William and Harry found themselves kicking a football back and forth while the older children ran between them, trying to intercept passes. Catherine and Meghan sat together on the blanket, taking turns holding Archie and watching the chaos with amused expressions. "This is what I imagined," Meghan said quietly to Catherine. "When I first learned about the family, I hoped for moments like this. Just being together without cameras or schedules or formal protocols." Catherine nodded, adjusting Archie's tiny hat as a breeze picked up. "It's not always possible, unfortunately. But William and I try to create these spaces when we can. The children need to know they're more than their titles, that they have real relationships with their cousins and uncles and aunts." During tea time, Prince Charles arrived unexpectedly, having driven over from Sandringham. His arrival shifted the energy slightly, bringing a reminder of the formal world they all inhabited. But watching him with his grandchildren, Harry saw a softer side of his father that had become more pronounced in recent years. "Grandpa," George called, running to show him a stick he'd found that supposedly looked like a sword. "Uncle Harry taught me a new football trick, want to see?" Charles, despite wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, gamely watched his grandson demonstrate his new skills. Charles approached Harry while the children played nearby. "He's beautiful," he said simply, looking down at Archie, who was now sleeping peacefully in his carrier. "He has your mother's peaceful expression when she slept." The mention of Diana was unexpected, but welcome, a rare moment when Charles acknowledged their shared loss openly. "I want to be the kind of father she would have wanted me to be," Harry said. "Present, available, putting him first when it matters." The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning, referencing ongoing conversations about duty and responsibility that had been happening within the family. "Your mother had very clear ideas about parenting," Charles said with a slight smile. "She wanted you boys to experience normal life as much as possible. She used to take you to McDonald's and let you wait in line like everyone else. Do you remember?" Harry did remember. Those small acts of normalcy had meant everything to him as a child. She wanted us to understand that being royal was what we did, not who we were. "Wise woman," Charles said quietly. Perhaps wiser than the rest of us gave her credit for at the time. It was as close to an acknowledgement of past mistakes as Harry had ever heard from his father. As the afternoon wound down, the children became increasingly reluctant to let their uncle and new cousin leave. George suggested that Archie could stay and sleep in the spare room, while Charlotte offered to teach him everything he needed to know about being a proper prince. Louis, true to his toddler nature, simply declared, "No go. Stay," while clinging to Harry's leg. "We'll visit again soon," Harry promised, meaning it completely. "And when Archie is bigger, we'll have proper football matches and picnics and all sorts of adventures." The promise felt like a commitment, not just to his children, but to maintaining these precious family connections regardless of what other changes might come. Standing in the driveway as they prepared to leave, Harry looked back at Amerhall. William stood with Louis on his shoulders. Catherine held Charlotte's hand, while George waved enthusiastically, and Charles observed it all with an expression of quiet satisfaction. This was his family, complicated and formal, and sometimes difficult, but also loving and supportive when it mattered most. During the drive home, Megan was quiet, processing the afternoon's events. "They love him so much already," she said finally. "And they love you. Whatever we decide, whatever changes, that won't change." Harry reached over and squeezed her hand while keeping his eyes on the road. "No," he agreed, "that won't change." For the first time in months, he felt certain about something, even as everything else remained uncertain. Family, real family, transcended titles and protocols and public expectations. Archie would know his cousins, and Harry would remain Uncle Harry regardless of what other roles he might leave behind. 2 months had passed since the family gathering at Amerhall, and Harry found himself once again in a formal sitting room at Buckingham Palace. This time, however, the conversation was different. The Queen, Prince Charles, and Prince William sat around a mahogany table covered with documents, legal papers, and official correspondence. The atmosphere was businesslike, but not hostile, a careful balance of family concern and institutional necessity. "The public announcement will need to be carefully worded," Prince Charles was saying, adjusting his reading glasses as he reviewed a draft statement. "We want to emphasize that this is a family decision made with mutual respect and understanding." Harry listened to the discussion about logistics, finances, and public relations while part of his mind drifted to earlier that morning. He had spent an hour with Archie, watching his son discover his own hands with fascination. Archie had laughed out loud for the first time the previous week, a sound that had made both Harry and Meghan cry with joy. These moments of pure happiness felt more real and important than any of the official considerations being discussed around the polished table. "Harry," the Queen said gently, bringing his attention back to the present, "I want you to understand that this arrangement allows for flexibility. Nothing is permanent if circumstances change." Her voice carried the wisdom of someone who had navigated decades of family and constitutional challenges. William leaned forward, his expression serious but supportive. "The children don't understand the details, obviously, but they know Uncle Harry and Aunt Megan are going to live somewhere new for a while." George asked if it meant he wouldn't see baby Archie grow up. The concern in William's voice was evident. Despite their different paths, the brothers' bond remained strong. "What did you tell him?" Harry asked, genuinely worried about how this transition would affect his relationship with his niece and nephews. "That family doesn't disappear just because someone moves away," William replied. "That Uncle Harry would still be Uncle Harry, no matter where he lived or what his job was called." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Charlotte suggested we get phones so we can talk to you every day. She's very practical for a 4-year-old. The conversation continued for another hour, covering security arrangements, charity patronages, and the complex web of relationships that would need to be maintained. Harry signed several documents, each signature representing a step away from the life he had always known and towards something entirely uncertain. As the meeting concluded, Prince Charles requested a few minutes alone with his son. The Queen and William departed, leaving father and son facing each other across the now empty table. I want you to know, Charles began carefully, that I'm proud of you for making this choice. It takes courage to prioritize your family's well-being over expectations and tradition. The admission surprised Harry. His father had always seemed so committed to duty above all else. I worry that I'm letting everyone down, Harry confessed. You, Granny, William, the charities, the people who support the work we do. Charles was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. When you were born, your mother and I had such hopes for you. We wanted you to be happy, to find purpose, to make a difference in the world. We never specifically wanted you to be miserable in service to the crown. He smiled slightly. Your mother would have understood this decision completely. She always said that being a good person mattered more than being a perfect prince. That afternoon, Harry drove to Kensington Palace for what would be his final visit as a working member of the royal family. He found Catherine in the garden with all 3 children, supervising what appeared to be an elaborate fairy house construction project involving twigs, leaves, and quite a bit of mud. "Uncle Harry," George called out, abandoning his building project to run over. "Look what we made. It's a house for garden fairies, but Charlotte says it needs to be bigger because fairy families are growing these days." Charlotte looked up from where she was carefully arranging pebbles into a path. "Gardens need all kinds of families," she said seriously. "Big ones and little ones and ones that live far away but still visit sometimes." Harry knelt down to admire their handiwork, struck by his niece's unconscious wisdom. "It's beautiful," he said. "The fairies will love it. Will you take care of it for me while I'm away?" "Are you going away for a very long time?" Louis asked, his lower lip beginning to tremble. At 2 years old, he didn't understand the complexities of the situation, but he sensed the emotion surrounding it. "I'm going to live in a different place," Harry explained carefully, "but I'll visit, and you can visit me. We'll still have adventures together, just different ones." Catherine gathered Louis onto her lap while the older children processed this information. "Uncle Harry will always be part of our family," she told them. "Sometimes grown-ups need to make changes to be happy and healthy, but love doesn't change." George, with the logical mind of a 6-year-old, asked, "Will baby Archie still be our cousin?" "Always," Harry assured him. "And when he's bigger, you can teach him all the important things like how to climb trees and which biscuits are the best and how to make Mama laugh." Later, after the children had been called in for baths, Harry and Catherine walked through the memorial garden. The white roses were dormant for winter, but the space still felt peaceful and meaningful. "Your mother would be proud," Catherine said quietly, "not just of this decision, but of the father you've become, the husband you are. She would understand choosing your family's happiness over public expectation." "How do you do it?" Harry asked. "Balance everything, the public role, the private family, the constant scrutiny." Catherine considered the question seriously. "I have good days and difficult ones, but William and I decided early on that our children's childhood comes first. Everything else we build around that." She paused, then added, "It helps that we're doing it together, that we want the same things for our family." That evening, Harry returned to Frogmore Cottage where Meghan was packing the last of Archie's clothes into a small suitcase. Their son slept peacefully in his crib, unaware that his life was about to change completely. "How did it go?" Meghan asked, looking up from the tiny onesie she was folding. "Better than I expected," Harry said honestly. "Sad, but right. The children understand as much as they can, and the family supports the decision even if they wish it were different." Meghan nodded, then gestured toward Archie's sleeping form. "I've been thinking about what we want to tell him someday, about all of this, about why we made this choice." Harry moved to stand beside his wife, looking down at their son. "That we wanted him to grow up knowing he could choose happiness. That we thought being his parents was more important than being perfect royals. That family love is stronger than public duty. And that he has cousins who build him a fairy garden," Meghan added with a smile, "and an uncle who will always kick footballs with him, and a great-grandmother who told us to follow our hearts." As they finished packing that night, Harry felt a mixture of grief and anticipation. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter, uncertain but chosen freely. He thought about his mother, wondering if she would approve of his choices. He thought about his grandmother, who had given him permission to find his own path. He thought about William and Catherine, who would continue the work while maintaining space for family relationships. And he thought about Archie, who would grow up knowing that love had guided every difficult decision made on his behalf. The cottage grew quiet except for the soft sounds of baby breathing and parents dreaming of a future built on their own terms. 6 months later, Harry stood in the garden of their new home in California, watching Archie take his first tentative steps across the grass. The Pacific Ocean sparkled in the distance, and the warm afternoon sun felt like a blessing after years of gray London winters. Megan sat nearby, ready to catch their son if he stumbled, laughing at his determined expression as he wobbled toward his father's outstretched arms. "Come on, little man," Harry encouraged, crouching down with arms wide. "You can do it." Archie took 3 more unsteady steps before launching himself into Harry's embrace, giggling with delight at his accomplishment. The phone buzzed in Harry's pocket, and he glanced at the screen to see a video call coming through from London. "It's Uncle William," he told Archie, accepting the call. The screen filled with familiar faces: William, Catherine, and all 3 children crowded together on a sofa that Harry recognized from Kensington Palace. "Uncle Harry," George called out immediately. "Did you see? We won our football match yesterday. I scored 2 goals, and Charlotte cheered so loud that everyone looked at her." "I did not cheer loud," Charlotte corrected with dignity. "I cheered enthusiastically. There's a difference. Mama explained it to me." Catherine smiled at her daughter's precision with language. "How's Archie? We've been wondering if he's walking yet." "Actually," Harry said, turning the phone so they could see Archie, "you have perfect timing. Show them what you just learned, buddy." He set Archie down on the grass and stepped a few feet away. "Walk to Daddy." The family in London watched in delight as Archie took several steps on his own, his face scrunched in concentration. When he reached Harry successfully, a cheer went up from both sides of the Atlantic. "He's walking," Lewis announced, as if this was the most exciting news he'd ever heard. "Can he run yet?" "I can run very fast." "Walking first," Harry laughed. "Running comes later. But I'll teach him, and when you visit this summer, you can race with him in the garden." William's face brightened at the mention of the planned visit. "The children have been counting down the days since we bought the plane tickets. George has made a list of everything he wants to show Archie, including his new bicycle and the proper way to feed chickens." "We don't have chickens here," Charlotte pointed out practically, "but we do have different birds." Mama looked them up in a book. "There are hummingbirds and something called a California jay." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, filled with updates about school, new words Archie was learning, and plans for the summer visit. When they finally said goodbye, Harry felt the familiar mixture of happiness and longing that these calls always brought. He loved staying connected with his family, but he also missed the spontaneous moments, the unexpected hugs, the daily rhythms of life together. Later that evening, after Archie was asleep, Harry and Megan sat on their back patio, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about their day. The transition to their new life had been challenging in ways they hadn't anticipated, but also rewarding in unexpected ones. "I got an email from one of my old charities today," Harry said. "They wanted to update me on the Veterans Mental Health Program we started. It's expanded to 3 new cities, and the waiting list has decreased by 40%. There was pride in his voice, but also a note of wistfulness. These projects had been his passion for years, and stepping away from official involvement had been one of the hardest parts of their decision. "You know you can still make a difference," Megan reminded him gently. "Maybe not in the same way, but your voice still matters. People still listen when you speak about things you care about." She was right, and Harry was slowly learning to find new ways to contribute. He had begun working with several organizations focused on mental health and veterans issues, approaching the work differently, but with the same commitment. The impact might be smaller in scope, but it felt more personal, more direct. I had lunch with a veteran yesterday, he continued, a young woman who served in Afghanistan. She told me that our conversations about therapy and PTSD gave her permission to seek help. She's doing well now, studying to be a counselor herself. These individual connections had become increasingly important to Harry, reminders that his work still mattered even if it looked different from before. A few weeks later, Harry received unexpected news that would test his commitment to his new path. The Queen had fallen ill, nothing serious, but enough to require hospitalization for observation. The family was gathering at Windsor, and Harry felt the pull of duty and love drawing him back across the ocean. Go, Meghan said simply when he shared the news. Family is family. Archie, and I will be here when you get back. The flight to London felt longer than usual, filled with memories and worry. Harry arrived at Windsor Castle to find the family keeping vigil in the familiar sitting rooms of his childhood. The Queen was resting comfortably, but her illness had reminded everyone of her mortality and the precious nature of their time together. Prince Charles pulled Harry aside during a quiet moment. I'm glad you came, he said simply. She's been asking about Archie, wondering if he's learned any new words. Harry smiled at this. He says, Dada and Mama and something that might be bird when he sees them in the garden. Meghan thinks he's trying to say book, but it sounds more like butt to me. Your mother was convinced you said horse at 8 months, Charles recalled. We spent weeks bringing you to the stables, trying to get you to repeat it. Turns out you were just making sounds that happened to sound like horse. When Harry was finally able to see the Queen, he found her sitting up in bed, wearing a comfortable robe, and reading correspondence despite doctors' orders to rest. She looked smaller than usual, but her eyes were bright and alert. Harry, she said with obvious pleasure, I was hoping you'd come. Tell me about California. Are you happy? Very happy, Granny, he said honestly, pulling a chair close to her bed. It's different, quieter in some ways, busier in others. But Archie is thriving, and Meghan and I are finding our way. Good, she said firmly. That's all I wanted to hear. She paused, then asked, Do you regret it? The decision to leave. Harry considered the question seriously. Sometimes I miss the work, the sense of purpose that came with the official role. I miss seeing the family regularly. But no, I don't regret choosing my family's well-being. I think you understand that. The Queen nodded slowly. I made different choices when I was young, choices that were right for my time and circumstances. But times change, and what matters most doesn't always change with them. She reached over and patted his hand. Family matters most, Harry. Everything else is just detail. During his 3-day visit, Harry spent time with each family member individually. He played football with George, read stories to Charlotte and Louis, and had long conversations with William and Catherine about parenting, responsibility, and finding balance. These connections reminded him that stepping away from official duties didn't mean abandoning his relationships with the people he loved. On his last evening in London, Harry walked through the gardens at Kensington Palace one more time. The memorial garden dedicated to his mother was beginning to show signs of spring, with early bulbs pushing through the soil and buds appearing on the rose bushes. William found him there as the sun was setting. Thinking about Mom? He asked, settling on the bench beside his brother. Thinking about everything, Harry replied. About the choices she made, the ones we've made, the ones our children will make someday. Do you think she'd approve of all of this? Harry was quiet for a moment, remembering his mother's fierce protectiveness, her determination to give her sons as normal a childhood as possible within their extraordinary circumstances. I think she'd understand that being a good father is the most important job I'll ever have. That protecting Archie's childhood matters more than protecting an institution. She'd also be proud that we're still brothers, William added, that our children know each other and love each other, that we figured out how to maintain the relationship even when everything else changed. Flying back to California the next morning, Harry felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in months. The family he'd been born into would always be part of him, would always have his love and loyalty, even if he served them differently now. But the family he was creating with Megan and Archie was his primary responsibility, his greatest joy, and his most important legacy. When he arrived home, he found Megan and Archie in the garden, where his son was practicing his walking skills with determination. Dada. Archie called out when he saw Harry, taking several confident steps toward him. He's been practicing, Megan said, watching their reunion with a smile. I think he missed you. Harry scooped up his son, marveling again at how much he had grown in just a few days. I missed him too. Both of you. He looked around their garden, with its California sunshine and ocean breeze, at his wife who had supported his difficult decisions, at his son who would grow up free to choose his own path. This is home, he said with certainty. This is where we belong. That night, as they put Archie to bed together, Harry felt the deep satisfaction of knowing he had chosen well. The path hadn't been easy, and there would be more challenges ahead. But he was exactly where he needed to be, a father first, a husband always, and a man at peace with the choices that had brought him to this moment of perfect, ordinary happiness.